Where's that darn Qara'ite Jew? They're making us rabbinists look horrible.
Shalom, and welcome to another exciting edition of the Torah Watchman Show, LLC. Yes, we have our own company here in Maryland, and hopefully I can transform it to a non-for-tax organization to help out poor Jews around the world, and we're doing this. Who am I? For anyone that's just subscribing to my site, well, I am none other than Rev ben-Emmett, your humble Qara'ite servant, who will present an exciting Torah Watchman Parshah for this week Torah cycle. I hope everyone's been well. There's a lot of things going on in Israel that we just absolutely have no control of. How can you help with a Jewish situation halfway around the planet? Well, you can get on your face and pray. You can also give donations to the IDF and their families. You can also make awareness of the hostages that are still being kept there. There are posters you can download. I have sign in front of my house with 13 of the remaining minor children, per se, I guess less than 18, that are still unaccounted for, presumed to be alive in Hamas control. Okay? So let's get started. We're in the book of Bereshit, and we're wrapping up the story of Yaakov, the life and journey, exciting adventures of Yaakov. The actual Parshah of Vayigash means, and he approached. Who is he? Namely, Yehuda, on the hands and the knees, begging for the safe return of his little brother, Benjamin, before what he thought was a viceroy next to the Pharaoh, which is none other than his estranged brother Joseph, who he engineered, was equivalent to today, prosecuted, second degree or third degree homicide, selling him into slavery in Egypt. I think Joseph was in Egypt for 17-something years. I cannot remember, 20-something, I cannot remember the exact number. But let's get started. If you want to find the words Vayigash, it's in Genesis chapter 44, verse 18. And as a general synopsis for the last Parshah, there is a confusion in series of events, and I just want to bring some clarification with that, okay? What am I talking about? Well, the Joseph, his pretty much prosecuting virtue in the lives of his brothers. I don't think he had a vendetta. I don't think he was getting back at his brothers. He definitely, you feel like he had a right? He felt like he was denigrated most of his life. Why? Because God chose him and not them for visions. But regardless, he wanted to test whether it's not their virtue. And if this sounds like the adversary, you're right on with that. Okay? Sometimes Elohim can use Jews and use righteous people to prosecute virtue in other people. We have judges, right? So-called Supreme Court judges and other righteous people, like in the Supreme Court in Knesset, the elders there, the chief rabbi. Yes, they are in a position, whether wrong or right, to judge cases and mitigate against accusations and supposed crimes. So what happened is that Simon was held hostage or captive by Joseph in order to get Yehuda to bring his little brother, his actually brother, Benjamin, back to Egypt so he could, supposedly, the story was, he accused them of being spies, coming into the land, finding out the strength and weaknesses of the Egyptian military, the army, or whatever. And he was playing that game. They did not know, because they didn't recognize their brother Joseph. They didn't. So he went a roundabout kind of way, sending them back to their father, and Bathsheba and Canaan there, and they went back and forth until Benjamin was finally brought and held captive too. Why was Benjamin in trouble? This is a young lad, okay? Remember the golden vase or chalice that Pharaoh had placed in the bags of Benjamin before they were sent away from Egypt? Now all the sons were sent back from Egypt back to Beersheba to Yaakov, remember? And then he sent a military there to come and have a mock posse per se, and found in Benjamin's backpack the supposedly stolen golden chalice, pitcher, whatever it was. Something that belongs in the Pharaoh's court and not in the bag of Hebrews, okay? So then he brought them back there, and he said, the rest of you can go. I'm only judging the crime of Benjamin, no one else. Everyone is free to go back to your father, okay? Because they kept on telling stories over and over again. You know how you first lie, and then a mountain of lies. You have to tell a mountain of lies to try to get out of that. Or you can just fall on your face before Elohim and say, I'm sorry, please forgive me, and try to make retribution to those people that you've wronged, okay? So that's where we're at here. So verse 18 and chapter 44, Bereshit, I'm going to read here from the Torah, from the Chumash in English, word for word translation here. Then Yehuda approached him and said, please, my lord, he's speaking to his brother, let now your servant speak something into my lord's ears. He asked for permission for audience. He was treating them like a king, okay? And let not your wrath be kindled against your servant, for you are like Pharaoh, okay? You imagine, you have essentially a chieftain of Israel who had so much ego and hubris and everything else. I think Reuben was actually firstborn, but Yehuda was going to be used by God in great and wonderful ways in the future. But now he's pretty much prostrating himself on his hands and knees before who he perceived as an individual that was equal in importance and rank as the Pharaoh. Okay? So in the first aliyah, all we told you about our previous Torah reading, Joseph demanded Benjamin remain behind in Egypt as a slave. The weeks of reading opens with this week's reading begins with a series of dialogue between Yehuda and his brother Joseph, who he thought was the second-headed man next to the Pharaoh. And I'm not going to read all of these sidras per se. I don't think it's necessary. But they were going back and forth, to the point that Yehuda said, hey, accept me as your slave if you turn to my father, who is very old in his age and going to early grave because he thinks he's lost another son. And he's already told the Pharaoh about the missing sons of the so-called 12 sons, that Joseph was supposedly dead or lost to the tribes of Yaakov. Okay. So he spoke of Yaakov's reluctance to allow Benjamin, Rachel's only remaining child, to make the trip to Egypt, and the great love Yaakov harbored for the youngest son. There was a lot of resistance by Yaakov, namely so. Okay? This is going back a little bit to the last Parshah. It's pretty much, Yaakov was looking at a situation between a rock and a hard place, a brick wall. Okay? If he didn't release his last son through Rachel, Benjamin, to the Pharaoh's custody, you remember when the chalice was suspected and they were arrested again? You know, not only would they starve, he would not see anyone again. All of them could be held prisoner by the Pharaoh, okay? Verse 31, it says, it will come to pass when he sees the boy is gone, and he will die. This is dialogue between Yehuda speaking to Joseph, okay? Before the throne of Pharaoh. And your servants will have brought down the hoary head of your servant, our father, in grief to the grave. Now it's kind of bold what he's saying here. He's on his knees talking to essentially someone equivalent to being the king. Someone can say, you can live and die based on my signet ring and based on my authority in Egypt. And he's turning it around a little bit. And essentially saying is that you will be responsible for an early grave of my father, who's advanced in age, if you don't release Ben-Emmett. And he's going back and forth. What you're seeing is a gradual tear down of Yehuda's stubbornness by Elohim, not Joseph. Joseph was just a willing, humble servant of Elohim to the end goal of saving Israel. Not just saving their flesh and their bodies from the ravages of the drought and the famine that was going on at that time, but saving their souls, transforming their neshama, making them strong men before the Lord their God that he could use for the future. Okay? So in the second aliyah, Yehuda continued, when Yaakov sees the boy is gone, he will die, essentially. So if I return back to Yaakov without Ben-Emmett, and I would promised him on the life of my sons, Ben-Emmett would come back. And he said he will die. He will die, okay? He explained this over and over again to Joseph. He was trying to touch Joseph's heart and get compassion, even though Yehuda and the others were accused of wrongdoing. Understand what's happening here, okay? Would you be in a position, Yehuda, other than begging mercy and compassion, admitting that you are a worm before the throne of Egypt, etc., etc.? Or would you try to do bait and switch, try to get the heart of Pharaoh, court of Pharaoh, over to your side, win something for you so you could save face, or just essentially admit that you're wrong and you deserve to be executed before Joseph? Okay? This is where I'm at here. So you had Yaakov, his settlement was in Beersheba, which is southern Israel, okay? At this point, Joseph could not restrain himself anymore after Yehuda said, I will be your slave in place of my little brother. This is what not just Joseph wanted, he was after. Elohim wanted to hear this. Elohim allowed all these series of events, all these bad set of circumstances for Joseph and the others to occur to the end goal of Teshuvah. Okay? Now, Joseph became so emotional. He sent out the Egyptians, the guards, the soldiers, the cupbearers or whoever in his court, sent them out away from this main, throne room or sitting room, whatever you call that in there, okay? He asked the Egyptians to leave. Then he revealed his true identity, finally, after all these tests, to reveal his true identity to his brothers. They did not believe it, okay? But he declared, I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? That's the next thing that Joseph wanted to determine. He knew that Ben-Emmett was alive. And now he wants to confirm that Yehuda is not lying again about his father in order to gain sympathy from the court of Pharaoh. Okay? So he assured them and asked them not to be upset about selling him into slavery. Can you imagine this? Joseph was saying, it's not by your works or deeds that I was sold into slavery. It's by the hand of God that you are here today. And I have grain cellars full of grain and corn and barley and everything else to feed the starving masses in the Middle East and the Levant. Okay? He said, not by your hand. So I'm not here to judge you for what happened. It is between you and your God, right? For it was to preserve the life that God sent me before you. You would have surely died in the desert in the famine these 7 years. And that was ongoing right now. That another 5 years needed to come to pass where you will not plow or reap harvest. Okay? No water in the desert makes it very difficult to grow anything. Makes it impossible. Okay? And Elohim sent me before you to ensure the survival of the land. That's what he was saying in the ending of the second aliyah. Beginning in the third aliyah, and verse 8, these are the writings of Moshe, by the way, in the book of Bereshit. It says here, now you did not send me here, but God and he made me a father to Pharaoh, a lord over all his household, and the ruler over the entire land of Egypt. What does make father to Pharaoh? In other words, someone was a chief overseer for all the different tasking managed through the king of the Egyptian empire at that time, namely the Pharaoh. Okay? So he was acting like as a father of the land, taking care of the children of Egypt in that regard. Interesting play of words. So the third day Aliyah, Joseph directed his brothers to quickly return to Canaan and bring Yaakov and his families back to Egypt, where Joseph promised to provide them with food until the famine ends. So let's wrap up a little bit. Joseph finally revealed his true identity before all of his brothers, and they were sent back to their father in Canaan listless. Can you imagine the conversations, riding on back of a camel, going that week-long journey back up to Bathsheba from Egypt? So Joseph embraced his brothers and cried. All the ceremony revealing his identity was very rough on Joseph, okay? These are tears that need to be cried long ago. Pharaoh was informed that Joseph's family had arrived, and he too instructed them to come to Egypt, where he would give them the best of the land. As even says in the Torah that the fellow Egyptian heard how deeply Joseph was crying. And then the Pharaoh found out, I guess as reported to some of his people there, that were watching over Joseph when he sent them out. They probably went back to the Pharaoh and reported what was happening, this anomaly here. What did the Pharaoh do? He was actually excited about Joseph finding his brothers after all these years and the family reunion. And they were sent back laden full of gifts, all the food, all the grain. They didn't actually pay for anything, and all this diatribe going back and forth to Egypt and Beersheba. And the spirit of their father Yaakov was revived once he saw the fact and confirmation that Joseph and also Ben-Emmett were safe and sound. Can you imagine that? Some people wait years to die because they're dealing with so much mourning. They're sitting Shiva. Some people just have a problem letting go, right? But now he is ready to meet his maker because everything he's been waiting for and mourning for and praying for has been revealed before his own eyes. Okay? Verse 28, and Israel, now Yaakov is, from this point on, is referred to as Yisrael because God called him Yisrael. Enough, the son Joseph is still alive, and I will go and see him before I die. So the fact that Yehuda kept his promise to Joseph and brought Ben-Emmett as he had promised, he believed that Yehuda eventually learned his lesson. In the sixth Aliyah, Yaakov and his entire family left Canaan. They unpinned their tents. They took all their property and wagons and carriages and other things, probably military support too, from thieves in the land, and then they traveled back, okay? So furthermore, Jehovah Elohim told him, I will go down with you to Egypt, and I will bring you up. Amazing, comforting words from the divine creator there. That wherever Israel was, God's neshama was there to be sure to be with them as well. Fifth Aliyah, this section names the 70 members of Yaakov's family that went to Egypt. Not going to get into all of that. It's self-evident, right? Verse 28, he sent Yehuda ahead of him to Joseph to direct him to Goshen. They did not know the landscape of Egypt. And they came to the land of Goshen. The land of Goshen is immediately west of the Nile River. And any land, even parts, was close to the Nile River there. It was always to be assured to be flourishing with healthy grasslands for the sheep. The sixth Aliyah, Yaakov arrived in Egypt with the province of Goshen, assuring that would be their leased property for this time on, indefinitely. So Joseph went there to greet his father finally. Can you imagine this family union? It's wonderful, right? Joseph prepared his family for meeting Pharaoh, and he instructed them, brothers, to tell Pharaoh that they are shepherds who only wish to tend their flocks, not eat the sheep, because the sheep there was actually a deity and a god that was worshipped by the pagan Egyptians. Amazing. Christians talk about the Lamb of God, the Pesach, the blood on the doorpost, and everything else. Well, this whole thing in myth and Christianity, I'm sorry, I'm not going to get down a rabbit hole with it, is based on a misnomer. These shepherds had sheep in Egypt. They were not allowed to kill any of them, sacrifice any of them at that time, at least for the space of 200 and something years. But they were maintaining these herds of sheep as a benefactor unto the Pharaoh and the priest, okay? Because they had directed this too. So simply by telling the Pharaoh, what is your job? What's your job? What's your role here? What are you going to do when you move your family to Egypt? They told them they're shepherds. And that was a good thing, and just leave it at that, okay? White lie? Perhaps. Okay? So indeed the brothers followed this script, and Pharaoh acceded to the request and gave them essentially everything they wanted. Yaakov was then brought before Pharaoh, and Yaakov blessed him. Imagine this encounter. The chief elder Israel before the Pharaoh. Joseph settled his father and his brothers, and he gave them property in the land of Egypt, the very best of the land, in the land of Ramses, as Pharaoh had mandated. Many people say the use of the word Ramses means that the Pharaoh of the time of Joseph, when he was alive at least, was the same ranking Ramses as mentioned in the Ten Commandments movie, the writing of Josephus. That's not necessarily true. It simply says the land of Ramses, okay? Don't read into any more than that is. We do not know the name of the Pharaoh that was in power of Egypt at that time. It's not germane, because Elohim would have put that information in Bereshit, so we wouldn't have to argue about the details, okay? Rabbinists have their own ideas about this. I'm not going to go there. Seventh Aliyah, wrapping up this Torah Parshah. While Joseph supplied his family with food, the rest of Egypt was in a desperate plight. First, they expended all their money to exchange for food, and Joseph sold them. Please listen to the sequence of events here. And then the money ran out. They had no more money to buy material, okay? And they paid for provisions with their cattle. Barter system, okay? Finally, when they had no money or cattle left, and a lot of them died because there's not enough food. The food for the people was the most important thing. They sold their land and themselves to Pharaoh. Now, speaking about the land that was given in Goshen to Israel and his sons, I'm speaking about Egyptians in general. This is what was happening. They had surfer there, and had middle echelons and rich and other people, just like we have in society today. Okay? And unfortunately, the lower class people suffer the worst. Okay? So, on and on, that you ran out of money, you ran out of cattle for trade, for bartering, and the only thing was left is to give up all your land to be government mandated by the Pharaoh. But at least they were kept alive, and they became tenants of their own land that they used to own. Okay, it sounds sad, but in the 7 years of this drought, there were difficult choices how to be made. Okay, a lot of these things are impactful historically on decisions that were made in other nations. Just want to go there a little bit. So meanwhile, in the land of Goshen, Yaakov's family prospered and multiplied exceedingly. Okay, now the way they prospered is defined as such. In other words, their women had lots of children. They were very fruitful and multiplied. They actually outperformed their fertility greater than average Egyptian women at that time. Why? Because the anointing of Elohim was upon tribal Israel when they lived in Goshen. So in other words, you see a sunshine and a rainbow over one person's house, and it may be raining the next door because they don't know Elohim. This is essentially what it was. And these people became peculiar before the Egyptians, that became distinguished before the Egyptian people as foreigners that came in the land, that was blessed by edict by the Pharaoh, that the Pharaoh would take care of these people indefinitely. And of course, I don't want to go in too far in the Parshah, but essentially, eventually, they became slaves there, at least for 232 odd years. Well, I hope you enjoyed this Parshah. I hope it was needful. I hope it was meaningful to you on how brothers can, even as strange as Joseph was before Yehuda and Reuben and Simon and the many others that worked to engineer a plan of deceit to sell him into Egypt, okay? Because of their jealousy and envy. That was the adversary working in Yehuda. Rashi may say Yehuda was the victim here, and Joseph was a tyrant, and Joseph caused all the squabbling and feuding among the people, and that Yaakov took sides in the situation and was not a good parent. It did not equitable per se, okay? But that's not necessarily true. God's hand was clearly with Joseph in the very beginning. Why? Because Joseph listened, his heart was humble. Yehuda refused to listen because he was stubborn and egotistical. And that's all this Jew has to say that. You won't read that in any Mishnah Torah or any Talmud tractate. Well, please share the love and wealth of truth to everyone who's willing to hear it. If they refuse to embrace your truth, live that truth. Bless them in the name of Elohim. Please subscribe and sign up for personal notify so you'll be the first one to receive a notification on YouTube of the next Parshah. Take care, Rabbi Aaron ben-Emmett, signing out until the next time. All the love to my Qara'ite brothers and sisters, B'nai Noach, and anyone out there that's been beaten down by someone else, you're welcome to this Jew virtual home here on